Welcome back to Flashpoint. This week, North Carolina's new legislative and congressional district maps faced several legal challenges. A bipartisan group of former governors, including North Carolina's Mike Easley and California's Arnold Schwarzenegger, even filing a brief in one of the lawsuits. The former governors argue that unfair maps really dilute people's votes, create more conflict, and make it harder to compromise because they encourage politicians to cater to primary voters, which diminishes the influences of the moderates, where a lot of people are. Joining us now, Professor of Politics at Catawba College, Dr. Michael Bitzer. Professor, thank you as always. We appreciate it.
My pleasure to be with you.
All right, you are our go-to guy for many things, but specifically recently when it comes to redistricting, and we know there's several pending sort of legal challenges to it. Where do we stand right now? As it stands right now, as I understand, tell me if I'm wrong, the sort of lines that have been drawn by the General Assembly are in place for the time being.
That is correct. And until we have a court either put a pause on those maps or ask the General Assembly to go back and redraw the maps, I think what we are dealing with for the March primary and most likely for 2022's general election is in place. Generally, courts do not want to insert themselves into this kind of dynamic. We have seen in the past lawsuits proceed and the maps be in place, even though they were ruled unconstitutional or illegal subsequently. So I would be very surprised if a court said, you know what, we're going to insert ourselves, we're going to put a pause on these maps, and more so, you'll have to redraw them. I just don't think that that's likelihood, even though we have numerous lawsuits on hand already.
So you don't think they'll do it before, say, the election next year, or they'll wait till after, or what's your, because I mean, I know we've been down this road many times in the last 10 years with the prior maps.
Well, it hasn't just been the past decade. It has been literally the past 40 years in North Carolina. So we're starting a fifth decade of litigation over redistricting lawsuits. I think that we will have these maps in place for the 2022 election. It is likely the court cases will take at least a year to proceed through. And so I'm pretty confident that we would see these maps in play for 2022. Beyond that, particularly for 2024 and beyond, I'm really not sure because the lawsuits will be in place.
Something else we're talking about, because it happened this week, is the Vice President and Secretary of Transportation coming here to Charlotte, talking about the infrastructure bill that passed last month. Less of a government question, I guess more of a politics question. I know mayors across the country have been vying for FaceTime when it comes to members of this administration, specifically when it comes to this infrastructure bill, because everybody wants their sort of chunk of the pie to get the green light. And nowhere is that more important than in Charlotte with our transit and transportation and infrastructure issues. Do visits like this, can you glean anything from this?
I think certainly it raises public awareness. You know, we have heard so much about this infrastructure bill, and it will take time for the impact to really be felt here in North Carolina. But I think this is kind of the rally show. This is the opportunity for the Biden administration, through the vice president, and particularly through the Secretary of Transportation, to make the kind of headlines to say, we have accomplished something, this is huge, and this is how Charlotte and the Charlotte region will be impacted by it. Certainly it's politics, but going into a midterm election year next year with the headwinds that Democrats are facing, they really need to show results. And I think that this tour across the country is the prime example of it.
One last question. The Supreme Court hearing arguments when it comes to a Mississippi case involving Roe v. Wade. It appears that with 6 conservatives on the court that there might be some momentous changes coming to abortion law, federally at least, here in the country. What does that mean? We won't know anything until next June, probably late June. What does that mean here for North Carolina?
I think certainly the dynamics of if we see Roe versus Wade either cut down further or in an extreme case overruled as precedent, would mean that Republicans would open up the opportunity to pass legislation to potentially ban abortions here in North Carolina. We'll have to wait and see what the decision of the Supreme Court is. Most likely 5 justices will set that new ground rule for abortion rights here in North Carolina across the state. But the likelihood is we could see some monumental dynamics come out of that decision here in this state and across the country.
All right. Professor of Politics, Mike Bitzer. Professor, thanks as always. Wearing an especially colorful tie for this edition of Flashpoint, and we're always grateful for it. Professor, thanks.
Good to see you.
Take care. More Flashpoint after this.